Should we jump in?
Sure, let's go.
Okay. All right. So we are here for our new voter workshop, and I'm going to go ahead and scoot us forward so we can actually see our names here. So I'm Allison, and I use she, her pronouns, and I have voted several times now. How about you?
I'm Ariel. I also use she, her pronouns, and I think I will be going in this election for my second or third voting experience.
Excellent. And so I'm wondering if maybe we should say, Ariel, kind of how we came to recording this video for new voters. And I should say too that like it's for new voters, not necessarily first-time voters. So sometimes I think it makes a lot of sense when folks who have even voted a few times still feel like a new voter, because it can be, yeah, it can be an intimidating experience.
For sure. And we honestly just met through some shit, like, I don't know, shared community and I guess passions of
Mhm.
certain topics. And one of them was voting and how important it is. And so we thought it would be cool to share that with those who may not know. And even this is a learning experience for me. So.
Absolutely. And it's been a good refresher to look through things, put things together. And um, I think our goal, yeah, is to sort of talk through some of the basics. So the how, where, who, when, why of voting. And I think we picked a good day for it because I actually got my absentee ballot in the mail today.
Ooh, exciting.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and early voting started in Michigan yesterday. So it is timely that we are doing this. And yeah, I guess one thing to toss out there before we move forward is that there's a lot of information out there that we looked through and that others can look through. If anyone who might be listening to this, provided that that there are people who listen to this eventually, if you come across anything that conflicts with something we've shared, and we might have inadvertently provided some kind of misinformation, please reach out. We'll make sure that we have our contact information available. We want to be sure that we're, yeah, putting things out there that are accurate and not confusing. So
Exactly. And we're just two human to human people sharing what we know best.
I like that too. Human to human people sharing what we
Yeah.
know best. Excellent. Okay. So I think you talking about our humanness is a good time for me to also say that this slideshow might be a tiny bit clunky, and we appreciate folks' flexibility. All right, so Election Day, November 3rd. That's coming up. I don't, woo, that is also just making, why is it going so quick? Whoa, there we go. Whoa, the clunky part. Yeah, so Election Day, November 3rd. As we mentioned, though, early voting has already started here in Michigan.
Mhm.
It's right around the corner.
Coming quick.
Very, very quick. Okay, so I think we already had a sneak peek there on what the next slide was.
Right. Why
Yeah,
vote?
yeah, good question. I'm wondering if you, I don't know. I mean, I wrote down some notes, but I'm wondering if you have anything that you want to share about why personally you feel like it's important to vote.
Um, I mean, I think there's many things. I think that voting is so important because when we go in, and whether it's filling out your ballot at home or going into the polls, you are making history in those moments and you never know what will come of it. But to be a part of that, awesome like community experience really adds something to it. um, and also just like basic things. I mean, you are voting for what your future will look like, what your friends' futures will look like, what your family's futures will look like, and it's like it's super essential and important to be a part of that process.
Oh, I love that. Do you feel like you've always had had that sense, like when you first started voting, that you were drawn to that idea of community and building the kind of future that you want for yourself and your family, your neighbors?
Um, I would say yes, and that goes hand in hand with my sister who has shared her passion with me. She is my older sister, and she has always communicated with me how important it is and how going in and voting means something, and that it's our job to take basically our future into our own hands. And it's something that she's helped me get passionate about, as well as taking like an AP government class in high school and kind of really understanding what voting means for me as a 24-year-old girl in Michigan. So yeah.
I when I think about why why vote, when I think about that question,
Mm,
it occurs to me, and I didn't grow up in Michigan. I didn't go to school in Michigan, but I know where I did grow up, we weren't really taught much about when certain groups of folks were able to vote.
okay.
I think it was just sort of talked about, like there were times when this wasn't the case, and now it is. It isn't that wonderful.
Hmm.
But I mean, folks have and are continuing to fight extraordinarily hard for the right that that should be theirs, that is theirs, to claim
Hmm.
that. And there are so many barriers that are still in place. It's full enfranchisement is not the case even now. And people have, yeah, they've fought so hard for that, and it's a critical part of our democracy. And so it feels important, yeah, to name that and to vote and to support the kinds of organizations and institutions that are trying to reduce the barriers that exist for people. Yeah, and there are a lot of badass people doing that.
I agree. And I mean, I mean, just as you said, so many people have fought for even you and me as females to have the right to vote, but to have as many amendments as we do that kind of have to break down those barriers, whether it's people of color, whether that's women, to have to go in and have a amendment written to break down a barrier really shows how hard we fought to have the right to vote and why it does mean so much.
I love that you didn't use the word earned. I feel like sometimes I hear people say that, women earned the right to vote, or,
Right.
yeah, folks of color earned the right to vote. And like that's, it's like it infers to me that people had to prove something, which, yeah, really rubs me the wrong way. And I think, part of what we're hoping to do just a little bit in the beginning of our conversation is to
Hmm.
share some of those milestones,
Yeah.
when, what voting looked like, a couple hundred years ago, and some of the benchmarks along the way. But we're talking about, yeah, like not so distant past.
Hmm. In the past, that often isn't communicated in our history classes. I think mine barely touched on the suffragettes and their like hard work. It was mostly the typical Christopher Columbus thing, and I think that it's our right to know our history and to know how hard, even for per se, my mother and her family fought as migrant workers in Michigan to have rights and to be seen as equal people. And so this is kind of what our conversation here is about. And I think we're going to be sharing some quotes too,
Mhm.
from others.
I believe that we have one of those, next, in fact. And well, I'm gonna wait and share the thing I was going to share because I'm now eager to see what quote is up. Okay. I know that there
So
are, yeah, some auditory learners,
yeah,
and yeah, I wonder, would you be willing to read it?
yeah, sure. So this looks like it's from Brooke K, saying, I remember going with my mom when I was little. They had a voting machine that they used to show people how to vote properly. The poll worker asked me if I wanted to learn how to vote, and she let me vote on the extra machine while my mom voted. I don't know if she had any clue how much of an impact her enthusiasm had on me. I still get excited to go to the polls. I always take my kids with me and make sure they understand what a privilege and responsibility it is to vote for our elected officials.
It,
Such a good quote.
yeah.
And I
Um,
think like family, even like for me, like it really does impact how we feel about voting, that passion.
it occurs to me that I didn't say that we tossed out a request to folks that if they had an experience with voting or something that they wanted to share about how an appreciation or like getting into the habit of voting was cultivated in them, that this was, yeah, something that we had invited folks to share with us, and we got several responses. We could only fit a couple of them
Right.
here in the slideshow, but it's been a lot of fun to not only listen to folks, but then also reflect on, yeah, on our own first time voting stories, or how voting was talked about or not in our households.
Right. Right.
Okay, so some of those kind of timeline things that we started to talk about, I think we're just going to hit a couple examples. Maybe. There we go. So, 1789, Constitution was signed, and the right to vote was extended exclusively. I'm like extended. That's
Right.
an interesting verb to have there.
Given.
White property owning men.
Mhm.
So 1789.
Yep.
Let's see here. Oh, and I wrote down, because I think we wanted to take some of the extra slides out of this, and I had lots of timeline slides, that in 1870, so that's not on here, but 1870, the 15th Amendment, and you were talking about the amendments,
Mhm.
those, so that one was passed, and that extended, again, that word, the right to vote to all male citizens, regardless of race, class, color, or previous condition of servitude. So that was
Mhm.
1870, like 90-ish years. That was terrible. I don't even know, after this. And we know, of course, that like saying that did not mean that there were not barriers for people who were not white male citizens.
In fact, barriers were definitely put in place.
Yes, they made sure of that. They extended those barriers. Yeah, that wasn't a good. I'm gonna have to get more quippy, I think. Okay, so 1789, we talked about the 15th Amendment, and we also, yeah, I'm really scooted forward here to the 19th Amendment. Um, yeah, so you mentioned suffragettes, and
Mhm.
yeah, so now in 1920, we have the amendment that extended to all citizens the right to vote, regardless of gender. Um, Again, many barriers in place for women, for Black women in particular, for Indigenous women, and for folks of color generally. The thing I was going to mention before, Ayriel, is that being able to both be proud of and claim the work, not claim, but be excited by and inspired by the work that women did, and knowing that when it comes down to it, white women had some fairly problematic roles in ensuring the right to vote, by by not supporting Black women and other women of color who were working alongside them, trying
Right.
to get enfranchisement for everyone. And so, yeah, I think that we'd be remiss to not say like that. That's something that white women were not just complicit in, but advanced their own their own ability and right to vote at the expense of other women when it came right down to it.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a little confusing and heartbreaking to see these women who were really truly making history and fighting and being jailed and beaten and all of these things for voting rights to then still disclaim the former, people of color and their fellow like Black women as still, well, you're not as important, but I need to vote.
Mm-hmm.
um, when it's like you're fighting for such an important cause, why not fight it with women, these, other women who have just as much beautiful, powerful energy as you?
I believe this could be an entirely different conversation
Yeah.
altogether. So another thing that I don't have on a slide, but just to note is that, this, we're talking 1919, 1920 here,
Mhm.
but in 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act declared all non-citizen Native Americans, so that their language there, born in the US to be citizens with the right to vote. So that was in
Mhm.
1924. But then it wasn't until 1948 that the last state laws that denied Indigenous folks the right to vote were overturned. So another, 24 years?
Yeah, a long time to deny
Mm-hmm.
the right to vote for people who lived here before you.
Yes, yes. Okay, so then the next mile marker that we have here.
1965.
Yeah. You want to tackle this one?
Sure. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, signed into law, prohibits any election practice that denies the right to vote to citizens on basis of race. It forces jurisdictions with histories of voter discrimination to submit any changes in its election laws to the government for federal approval prior to taking effect, which, from my understanding, was to call out states that were still discriminating against its citizens.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was, I think, just in 1964 that poll taxes were outlawed, maybe the 24th Amendment. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so that acknowledgement, like you said, that like, even though technically um, folks had the right to vote technically prior to this, back to the 15th Amendment, that there were real structural and other barriers in place that made it dangerous, and impossible for many folks to be able to exercise that right.
Even in 1965, I think at that point my mom was almost 10, and they're still breaking down the barriers for our citizens to vote. And so it just speaks so much more to why voting is so important and seeing how hard others have worked to get us to this place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my mom was also about 10 years old then, and
Mhm.
um, yeah, and I think it's important to know like how and where we're situated in history, and also
Yeah.
that, like, we're still creating that. I mean, when we think about the folks who are not able to vote now and why that is, if there's some folks with a felony on their record that can't vote, or if they're currently incarcerated, I believe, in some places, and knowing what we know about the I say it loosely, but the criminal justice system, like that sets up a whole nother kind of structural opportunity to deny folks the ability to vote. And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of fighting that is continuing and will continue.
Right. Hmm.
So 1965, the next one I believe that we have on here. Here we go. The 26th Amendment extended the right to vote to all citizens 18 and over. And then the Voting Rights Act that you mentioned from 1965, there were some special provisions extended a
Hmm.
decade later, a full decade later, that banned literacy tests and mandated assistance to language minority voters.
Goodness, our ancestors really had to beat this into um, our country.
1975.
Oh,
Yeah.
there, it's literally what? It's not that long ago at all.
Nope. Okay, and then I think the last one that we have on here is certainly not long ago. Yeah, so the Americans with Disabilities Act, so 1990. And this was one that ensured that election workers and polling sites had to provide services to ensure that folks with disabilities could vote.
Goodness. And the barriers continue.
Yeah. So, I think we at least shared what our why is, and gave a snapshot of some of the context for where we are now. And I think we're on maybe the who can vote,
Yeah.
theoretically, at least.
I remember the big 18 years old, wow, you're finally like technically an adult, you can vote. And I remember that kind of being a super exciting, I don't know, like gauge for me to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you in, so I didn't turn 18 until I was in college.
Hmm.
And I think that the first time I could vote was in a presidential election.
Yeah.
Presidential election year, yeah. Mm-hmm.
My memory does not gauge me well, but I think the first time I voted might have been for a non-candidate. Um, thing. I can't remember what it was, but I do remember the first time going in for a primary
Mm-hmm.
and how like nerve-wracking and not knowing what to expect. And
Yes. I am wishing that there had been some sort of, I don't know, informative and conversational video that would have explained to me what I could have expected or should have expected when I was voting.
right.
It was terrifying. Um, so who can vote? US citizen, 18, and for us in Michigan, a resident of Michigan, and cannot be serving a sentence in jail or prison.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
So, what are some deadlines?
there are a lot of them. There are a lot coming up as well. And like I mentioned, absentee ballots, the folks that have requested them, they are going out, and early voting started in Michigan yesterday. Um, let's see here. So registration deadlines felt like a good place to start for me. And I changed this up a little bit in the days since we talked, Ayriel, because there were some confusing timetables, and that just like that strikes me like this is not necessarily an easy thing to navigate always.
Hmm.
But when you're going to register to vote, so not actually vote, but to register to vote, the deadline for that, if you're going to do it online, is October 19th. If you want to register by mail, it has to be postmarked by that same date, the 19th. But you can actually register to vote in person up to and on Election Day, November 3rd.
Right. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I didn't look at the deadlines in other states, but I would. I mean, I don't know if anyone will watch this in Michigan, so I certainly don't expect folks to be watching it in other states. But I would caution anyone who might have accidentally stumbled upon this to check out your own state's deadlines. And then the next one that we have on here. All right, so this is what an absentee ballot request looks like, essentially. So do you know much about what an absentee ballot is?
Um, from my understanding, it's just the thing in which you vote for everything.
So I like this was confusing to me as well when I first learned about absentee ballots. So you know,
Mm.
you can register. You have to register to vote, of course. But then if you want to vote not in person, if you want to vote absentee, you have to fill out an absentee ballot request. And so this is something that, at least in Michigan, you don't have to have a specific reason in order to vote absentee. And it's not always been like that. You know, if you were maybe a college student or you were going to be overseas or you couldn't vote in person for some other reason, there were opportunities to request an absentee ballot before, but at this point, you don't need any kind of special circumstance in order to request an absentee ballot. So this is roughly what that absentee ballot would look like. And there's just some basic information in there. And then on the next slide, we have some deadlines associated with absentee ballots. Yeah, so you can request one of these ballots all the way up to October 30th at 5 o'clock, which is just a handful of days before the election.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, but if you, so this is kind of interesting. If you decide to return that ballot, and so this is the ballot, this is not the application.
Mm.
So you can still request it by October 30th, but then when you return your ballot, so that completed ballot where you are casting your votes, that has to be postmarked by November 2nd, the day before the election. However, if you decide to return it in person, which you are able to do, you have until November 3rd, the election day, by 8 o'clock. I did read something just the other day that October 3rd is the recommended last day to mail in your absentee ballot. So this says return by mail by November 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
This other or this source said by October 3rd, because you know there are challenges, let's say, with the uh, hmm. So with the Postal Service, there are some imposed challenges and some question marks. And so I think there's just a lot of encouragement to, if you know that you're going to vote by mail or by absentee ballot, request that ballot and then turn in that ballot as soon as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I remember you mentioning, because for me, where absentee ballots are kind of a newer thing that's popped up, that I was like, well, what if I send in by mail and it gets lost? Or like, where can I take it to know for sure that it gets somewhere? And you mentioned taking it to the county clerk or something like that.
Yeah, so I would double check because there are, yes to the clerk, I should say yes. Yes. But whether it's at township or county clerk, I think can vary. So whenever you see anything on a website or on a ballot that says the word clerk and where you have to go to a clerk's office to drop something off or to do something, make sure that you check for your area, whether it's your township or your county clerk's office.
And you mentioned that like once you do, there is possibility to even track your ballot.
Yeah, and I don't know when that cuts off. But
Mhm.
there are some states and some areas where you can kind of double check and make sure that your ballot was received. And we have some resources in a packet that we're going to ensure are attached to this video, that have a lot of websites and guides and information that folks can access that talk more about this stuff, which is, I hope, helpful. There's one more thing that I would say about sending in your ballot by mail.
Yeah.
So I voted absentee in the primary, and I am so grateful that someone told me that my ballot actually, or the envelope that my ballot was in, had to have two stamps on it,
Mm.
to get it to the clerk's office. So if you are not dropping off your ballot in person at your clerk's office, make sure that you put enough stamps, put three, I don't know, just put lots of stamps on it to ensure that it's not sent back, or that it's not discarded for whatever reason. And then there are some instructions on the absentee ballot to make sure that you're putting it in another envelope, a protective envelope, and signing it at the seal. So just make sure that you're looking at all of those instructions before you're putting it into the mail. Anything else that you can think of with absentee ballots?
Oh yeah. So let's say I do sign up to get an absentee ballot, and then come the day for voting, I've been like figuring, do I want to send this in? Do I want to go and vote? I can't decide. And I know that I can take my absentee in person on November 3rd, and I can also go in and vote. So if I have my absentee ballot and I decide, nope, I want to go to the polls, I want to vote, what does someone do with their absentee ballot?
That is a great question. So I asked a friend who works the polls on election day about that,
Mm-hmm.
and they said that you can. So there's a couple options actually. If you haven't filled out your absentee ballot, you can bring it in with you and give it to the election workers and say, I haven't used this, take it, shred it, and then you can vote in person.
Mm-hmm.
If you have already submitted your absentee ballot and you're like, wait a second, I have changed my mind, or I need to, I really want to vote in person, you can have your ballot spoiled.
Mm-hmm.
And there is information we have some websites that you can go to and figure out how to do that, but you do have the option to spoil your absentee ballot. If you go to vote in person and you don't have that absentee ballot with you, you can still vote. They'll ask you to sign an affidavit that you will destroy your ballot, like if you left it at home accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
And
there.
they do that to ensure that voter fraud doesn't happen.
Yeah. And voter fraud isn't really, it's my understanding that's not something that we should be terribly concerned about, that voter suppression is
Mm-hmm.
much more of a realistic concern. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, and I know a lot of folks right now are weighing, for many reasons that we could talk about for a while, but are weighing whether or not they should vote in person or not. And
Right.
certainly COVID-19 plays a part in this, as well as a lot of things with our current president. And so, yeah, we're not advocating for any one thing over another.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to vote in person. Even though I got my absentee ballot today, I have decided that I am going to vote in person because I want my vote counted on that day. But it's not possible for everyone. And so, yeah,
It's
vote in the
nice to have that option though.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And now that we've broken down all the hows to vote and all that, how do we find where we vote?
Oh, well, there is definitely some information on that. I think there was one more quick note, just so that folks know that it's up to 4 o'clock on November 2nd. That if you still haven't gotten your absentee ballot, that you can go in person to your clerk's office. And then that spoiling your ballot that I mentioned, you can do that up to 4 o'clock on November 2nd with a written request in person. And that's to go and get your new ballot from the clerk's office. Or again, you can take it in person to your polling place on election day and vote in person. Let's just make sure that there's nothing else. I guess there is one. Yeah, so up to 8 o'clock on November 3rd. Looks like you can still go in to your clerk's office. And I know that this was a little bit confusing for someone that I spoke with during the primary, where they actually went to their polling place and they wanted to get an absentee ballot, and that person sent them to the clerk's office, which was where they were supposed to go. But I think it can just be a little bit confusing. So again, check location, and then if it says something like clerk's office, check to make sure that it's, county or township.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can even register on election day to vote. You can, like, if you thought that you were registered before, and everyone should make sure that they're registered, but if you weren't registered, or there was some reason that you thought you were but you weren't actually, you can register on election day itself. It's not at the polling place though.
And if you're unsure if you're registered, I do believe you're able to call the correct clerk's office and ask them, and they can look you up and tell you.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of different websites where, and actually I think we're going to talk about some of them, where they'll confirm your registration status as well, and then give you a bunch more information. But I think you had that question about, so where do I vote? If you decide that you're going to vote in person, how do I know where I'm supposed to show up to do that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of resources, but one that I have really been enjoying is this Vote 411. It has a ton of information, but if you put your address, the one that you're registered at, into this website, it will tell you your polling place. It'll give you a lot of other information, but it gives you the specifics on that. And you could do that now. You could find out right now where your polling place was. And I know that there weren't directions on phones when I voted for the first time. So I printed directions, I think, from MapQuest to my polling place the first time. Yeah. So this, you can find out, like you said, by calling to make sure you are registered and find out where you're registered. But this is another good resource to find that out.
And that resource is super amazing just to find out more specifications for the specific area in which you're voting. And that's not just Michigan based, it's all 50 states, I believe.
Yep, indeed. So then just a quick reminder on day of, what we have is a 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Opening for folks to be able to vote. And I didn't know this originally, but if you are in line by 8 o'clock, they have to let you vote. Have to. So if there's a really long line and you get there and it's 7:58 and you're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to make it inside by 8, that does not matter. If you are in line by 8 o'clock, they have to let you vote.
That is good to know. And another thing I actually found out that's good to know is when you go to your polling places, you're allowed to take a special piece of paper that marks down who you wanted to vote for, in case you have a wonderful ADHD brain like myself and can't remember anything.
Well, there's also, there's a lot of choices to make on the ballots, and we're gonna, I think, look at some of those things and resources for how folks can learn more about the different things that we're being asked to consider. But yeah, you can take a little cheat sheet in for sure. I also learned that if by chance you go to your polling place and you are turned away because they say your name is not on, that it's not on the register, don't leave. You can say to them, and these are the magic words that I learned. You can say, "I request a provisional ballot as required by law." Yep.
Powerful words.
Mhm. I request a provisional ballot as required by law. I would also write that down because I feel like I'd get so flustered and anxious that I wouldn't remember, and I'd probably
Right.
cry. But yeah, I request a provisional ballot as required by law. I think we have some more quotes coming up
All right.
after the clock goes a little bit more. I paused it very early. Here we go.
Okay, this one looks like from Julie B. One of my favorite lessons in 8th grade was a mock election our social studies teacher held. He did it every 4 years during a presidential election year, and I was so excited it happened while I was in his class. We had to research candidates, and he had almost identical election ballots to the real ones at the time. He said every year the mock election would accurately predict the real one, almost right down to the percentages. I loved seeing how big of a deal my vote was in the scheme of things. My first real vote for a presidential election was in college. I remember staying up super late to see the results come in. It is exciting, important, and somewhat terrifying, and a wonderful exercise of our freedom to choose. She really put it super well, like that fear that you have sitting in front of the TV, listening and like holding the suspense for what will happen.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that we're going to know on election day this year what the results are, but yeah, I remember that very, very clearly.
Mhm.
And then we have another quote, I think, right after this.
Okay. Is it Mary, I think?
Yeah,
I've learned how to deal with both the disappointment and excitement from elections, and we pride ourselves on voting every election possible, especially the primaries. Even the small positions play a huge role.
yeah. I think when we were chatting about this recently, you mentioned something that felt really important to me, that like it's every role on the ballot that has an impact on how we move through our day to day, what our water is like, what our trash collection is. I mean, like there's just the things that seem invisible are
Right.
their policies,
Yeah.
uh, and yeah, like we're not just voting for a president. We're voting for the people that are our neighbors and
Mhm.
whose lives intersect with our own in really meaningful and profound ways.
Right. And I mean, I think like when I think of the smaller positions, the yes and like vote yes, vote no that you see around your like local places
Mhm.
everywhere. And I mean, you're voting for your school districts, you're voting for maybe how local money will be spent. Rather, that's here in Traverse City, how we had our fancy little road block off for the summer. I mean, it affects every part of our daily life. So even though it's not presidential, I think smaller positions are almost more essential because they interact with us on a much more personal level.
Hear, hear. So there is, let's see here. Um, Goodness, there was something you said just a few moments ago about like knowing what to expect
Mhm.
when you were going to the poll to cast your vote. And I think we're
Right.
going to spend a little bit of time talking about not only like when you're there, what to expect, but how you can best prepare yourself, whether you're voting in person or by absentee ballot.
Mhm.
And so I think the first thing on here is an option for a voter guide that you can check out to get the scoop on what will be on your ballot I mean, pretty comprehensively. So if you were to enter your address in here, they will tell you which offices are on the ballot, which candidates are running for those different positions, and then also, as you mentioned, those proposals that are kind of like the yes/no variety.
Hmm.
So you'll be able to see, okay, what is my ballot going to look like? Who do I need to be researching to figure out who to vote for? So there's no surprises when you show up day of and you're like, I didn't know that the sheriff was an elected position.
Yeah, it can be super overwhelming. I think for me, when it started talking about like voting for the university presidents, and I was like, I did not come prepared for this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will not tell you some of the ways that I used to decide on candidates that I had not been prepared to vote for when I first started voting. Um, yeah, it is. It's not something I'm proud to think back on, but I at least know now that there are ways for me to know what I have to be prepared for, and yeah, and so I'm excited that there are so many ways for people to tap into this. Yeah,
Resource,
yeah,
yeah. And I
all
think
resources, there's so much.
another thing that I didn't know is going in, let's say you didn't do some research on a certain thing, like it is okay to leave sections blank if
Mm,
you don't feel comfortable
yep,
voting for something that you don't know about.
absolutely.
No reprimand there. And
Mhm.
there's also like options to fill in names if you don't see them, which is another awesome like right we have as American citizens. So that's like another plus that I didn't know about.
Yeah, and so, I think we've already mentioned that there's a lot on the ballot. There is a lot to consider, a lot to weigh. And, it's not only for me, and I know we've talked about this, it's not just who is running for
Mhm.
these different offices, like who are the candidates, what are the offices, but what does the office do? What is a township clerk? What is a township trustee? What does the sheriff oversee? What are those NMC, positions that you're being asked to vote for? So making sure that we have information about what the purview of that particular thing that we're voting for really is. And then,
Mm.
like, what are the term limits? There are some of them where it's 4 years, some where it's two. And so, yeah, knowing that, and then also, how many of each kind of office you get to vote. Like, so, in my township, we can vote for two township trustees. In
Mhm.
other areas, you can potentially vote for more, or you can vote for, two judges or two. There's just, if you don't know what you're looking for already when you come in to vote, in my experience, it can be a little daunting.
Yes, definitely is.
And then I think another thing we talked about, being a helpful thing for us to be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are some different options that we have, right? So on your ballot, you can just vote straight party. So, not fill in all the individual ovals on your ballot, but just say, okay, I'm going to vote straight Dem or straight Republican.
Mhm.
Or you have the option to fill in the bubble or bubbles for each specific office.
Which is cool and helpful in many ways. Like if you want to vote one party for one thing, another party or person,
Mhm.
or you can just be like, nope, I feel more comfortable voting just this party. You fill that in, and there you go.
Mhm. Yep. And then, another thing is that there are some offices that will not list a party affiliation. They're nonpartisan positions. And so those are the ones for me that I for sure feel like I need to research, because I don't have what sometimes can be a knee-jerk reaction to, oh, I'm just going to vote for, like, even if I vote straight party, if there's no party listed, then you still have to make some choices about the nonpartisan ones.
Right.
And I should say this is not the case for the primary election. You get a ballot for a specific party on the primary election or for
Mhm.
a primary election. All right, so there's a sample ballot that we have an image of, which is clearly not for our current election. It's from 2012, and it's from a different county, but it was one of the clearest images I could find. So yeah, so there's that option that we mentioned with the straight party ticket, and then you can see the ovals that you'll be asked to fill out, and it will tell you things like, vote for not more than one, vote for not more than two, and this is again all information that you can find out in advance of stepping into your polling place.
So as a quick question, let's say I do choose a straight party, but then there's two or more selections and they're both of one party. What does that look like, I wonder?
Yeah, that's a good question. You like on this one where the State Board of Education vote for not more than two, there are more than two. No, actually, there's just two of each of those
Mhm.
and then one of the others. So there's not, I think that it will, if you vote straight ticket, it will cover the options where there are party affiliations listed.
Okay.
And again, if there are actual humans listening to this and that is incorrect, please let us know, and we'll make sure that we correct it. Okay, and you already mentioned that you can bring a cheat sheet in, so you don't have to memorize. Okay, I'm going to vote this person for this role, and this one where you can write all of it down. You don't have to memorize it. It's not a test.
Thankfully.
Yes, yes, yes. And then you also already mentioned, and I think this is so important, and I'm so glad that you did, that there are these proposals, right? That you're going to be asked to consider at the state, county, and or district level, and those yes or no questions. And those those have always seemed really daunting to me
Right.
when I
I
didn't
know.
look at them in advance.
Yeah. Well, the way that they word things can just really be super confusing.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Agreed. And so that resource that we mentioned earlier that has your sample ballot,
Mhm.
all of the things that you'll be voting for, these will be on there too.
Okay.
And then something that I'm sure folks know, but we just want to remind you, if there are any questions while you are at your polling place, there are folks that you can ask. That is what they are there for. And if they can't answer it, um, or many of your questions, then they have folks on hand that they can contact to ask your questions of. And again, there'll be information on the ballot itself about how you need to fill in your oval and how you cannot fill in your oval so that it's not disqualified. But any questions, there are people there whose job it is to help.
Yeah, and they always super friendly and welcoming and never feel like anxious or bad for asking for their help because they are more than happy to be there.
Mhm. And I found out that if you mess up on your ballot, if get there and you accidentally, I don't know, fill in the wrong oval, you can get a new ballot. So that's just something to keep in mind.
That's good.
Yeah. Not that I've done that. I have actually done that. Yeah, I'm really glad you can get a new one. And then, of course, one of the pinnacles of voting,
Oh,
the I voted sticker.
the iconic I voted sticker that
Yeah.
you flood with your social media with pride and joy.
hmm And I'm not going to lie, Ariel. I will say that on election day, I look for these on people, and I get excited when I see an I voted sticker, and I know that people can vote absentee, and so if they don't have a sticker, it doesn't mean that they didn't vote. But I just still get excited when I see the sticker.
I know, and it's like even if you don't want to have the conversation about like who the specifics are for voting, like it just adds some kind of like communal pride. Like you guys are in this, you're doing it together. You can point at each other's stickers and talk about, oh, I went this morning at 7 a.m. or oh, I
Mhm.
just left from there and I'm grabbing my afternoon coffee. And it adds this like union-ish community feel that I've always appreciated.
Yeah. Another thing I appreciated, and this only happened to me once, but I voted at a location that was across from a bakery once. And
Ooh.
when you go, again, just the one time when you went with your I voted sticker on election day, they would give you a specific cookie that they had for free.
Ah, fancy voting cookies.
Yeah, so I'm just saying if there are any bakers that are, listening and want to, um, yeah, galvanize voter turnout, I would say baked goods are, well, I don't know. I'm going to get a cookie and I'm going to vote anyway. So, okay, so I think we just have a few more things, and this is kind of a mishmash here. The what am I missing? Because there are just some key things that we wanted to be sure folks were aware of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing is definitely bring your ID,
Mhm.
rather that's your driver's license, your Michigan ID. I do believe passports are even considered a legal form of ID to bring, but if you forget any of those things and you have your voter registration card, I always keep mine in my car just in case. Grab that and bring it in.
And if you do forget identification, state issued identification, you can still vote. You'll just need to sign an affidavit, but
Mhm.
that can take a little bit. And just bringing an ID if you have it is, like you said, the best bet. So, true story, you cannot take a selfie with your ballot. I don't take selfies, so the chances of that happening are slim to none for me. But if I were to, it would be disqualified.
See, that's a good thing to know in the century of the selfie.
hmm Yeah, so no selfies with your ballot. And then also, Michigan has prohibited the practice of displaying election related materials at the polls. And that's been the case for decades. So you
Mhm.
can't have clothing or buttons or other materials that have election related materials. And that is within the polling place or 100 feet of an entrance to a polling place. So if you're like 103 feet away, cool. 99 feet, absolutely not. And if you go into the polls with a shirt, button, a face mask with a candidate name or something related to the election, you'll be asked to cover it or remove it.
Mhm. And I think that's just like a safety protocol. We don't want any drama or any craziness, just clean slate.
Well, that ship has sailed, Ariel. However, I do agree that it is not necessarily um, needed
Mhm.
or desired at the polls. But
Right.
I think that the drama is officially here. We can't, yeah. Um, okay, so I think there's just a few more things here. So, oh, one last quote.
Okay. By Mitch. I voted my first time as a senior in high school. It felt so special to walk through the school doors with my dad, as if we were there, oh, as if we were then on an equal level. Prior to that, my parents would get me and my younger brother to the kitchen table to talk about choices. Which I think again, like that really just circles back to like how important family and like those people that are closest to us influence us and encourage us uh,
hmm
when it comes to voting.
Yeah, yeah, it makes it important. It makes it a ritual. It makes it an expectation. And yeah, I really like you're building that muscle, that
Right,
civic.
and I think it also like adds to like the normalcy of it
Mhm.
and encourages like those younger kids to go out of their way to find out answers and research outside of maybe the typical Facebook post.
Mhm. Yes. um, okay, so the last things, oh, that just, so having a voting plan. There is social science research that says if you have, or that has proven as much as, yeah, so proven that if you have a voting plan, you are more likely to actually vote. And these are some of the recommended or not options, but action steps that you should do to affirm your voting plan. And then to check in with others about their voting plan. So confirm your registration is up to date. Check to see if you have your ID. Do that research we talked about. Encourage your friends to make a voting plan. There is an election protection. Oh, I like that. That sounds nice when you say it. Election protection hotline number. Put it in your phone. So if you're there on election day at your poll and you're being turned away for whatever reason, or you feel like something is not quite right, you can always call this election protection hotline. Yeah, get your mail-in ballot requested, or find your polling place, and then get that ballot in, or even figure out like, what time am I leaving the house on election day? What route am I going to take? Like, there is no level of detail that is too much or too specific when it comes to your voting plan.
Yes, I agree. And I think like having the route set in your mind is super helpful. Last election, I literally woke up, rolled out of bed, put a hoodie on, and went to my voting place.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you knew where it was and you had that plan.
Yes.
All right. And then, it already says it, encouraging your friends to make a voting plan. Our request, our challenge, our invitation, our hope is that you call or text 5 friends and ask them what their voting plan is. And it's not too soon to start. Early voting has already begun. Yeah, we have a packet of information, as we mentioned, that will have what we hope are some informative resources to not only ensure that you know how to be best prepared on election day or leading up to election day, but also how to do some of that research.
Mhm.
And our contact information will be on there. So if there are questions or corrections that need attention, then folks can let us know. Anything else that you would mention, Ayriel?
No, I think that's it. And when you do share, like I made sure to call my mom, my brothers, my friends. And I think by just sharing that, it can also get the people around you excited and asking themselves those questions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I'm really grateful, Ayriel, that we had a chance to talk about this, and that I was able to learn more about your experiences around voting and your excitement about about engaging in this way. And happy election season.
Yes, to you as well. It's coming up soon.
It's here. It's already here.
I know.
All right. Thanks all.